Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at the top 25 college football teams for 2020 in my opinion. I hope you enjoy. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Jaden Daniels coming back as a sophomore quarterback. He showed some great prospect in his freshman year. He had a 400-yard game with 3 touchdowns against Oregon. Replacing Eno Benjamin and Brandon Ayuk is going to be a problem for them, but AJ Carter and Frank Darby can fill those gaps. And they did show massive improvement in Herm Edwards' second year, and it culminated in the Sun Bowl win against Florida State, and I think they're only going to get better this year. But the only problem is the schedule's harder than they had last year. They need to travel to Oregon and USC, and they've got Utah and BYU at home. But I think it's an up-and-coming program, and I think they're going to sneak into the top 25. They'll look to build off the back of a successful 2019 season in which they went 11-3. It's going to be Kyle Whittingham's 16th year with the program, and he knows Utah football inside out. And for a school of their size, he's coached them to great success. The big focus this year is going to be on restructuring the defense because 6 starters were drafted, and it was the second best defense in college football in 2019. There's going to be quarterback and running back battles in 2020 because Zach Moss and Tyler Huntley were both drafted, but I still think they're going to have a successful season. Their schedule's very kind, with their hardest games coming against USC and BYU, and they're both at home. The North Carolina Tar Heels at 23, bit more of an outside bet. It's kind of a hunch from me, but I think that North Carolina are going to click together this year and rack up some wins. Mack Brown is an extremely good coach, and since his second stint started with North Carolina in 2018, they've caused some great upsets against Miami, South Carolina, and they almost beat Clemson. But this year they do have a tough schedule with matches at UCF, Miami and Boston College, and they've also got a big game against Auburn in week 2 at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Sam Howell's going into his sophomore year, and he'll continue to air the ball out in their air raid offense, and they've also got 10 out of 11 starters returning this year and a wide receiver core that's really deep. They've got real weapons on offense, and both of their running backs had 1,000 yards from scrimmage last year. 4 of the starters graduated on defense, but good recruitment, ranked 16th overall in the country. I think this could be a real team to keep an eye on. I believe Oklahoma State are going to finish number 22 in 2020. I'm expecting big things from this team after an 8-5 finish in 2019, and they've got 9 out of the 11 starters on offense coming back. There's going to be 2 words that will be key to their success or not this season: Chuba Hubbard. He would have been the first running back off the board if he entered the draft, but instead he stays and provides his services for another year, which provided over 2,100 yards and 21 touchdowns in 2019. The quarterback Spencer Sanders is going into his sophomore year, and hopefully he's past his freshman inconsistencies. He's also got a really solid receiving core there. The linebackers are the stars of the Oklahoma State defense, and most of their starters return, and as long as this defense holds, their offense should do the work for them. Their schedule's okay this season, but I think there's going to be some losses at Oklahoma and Baylor, and there's potential banana skins against Oregon State and TCU. But overall, I think an improvement and a good season for Oklahoma State. I really like this Iowa team and the way that they've progressed since 2015, but the extremely tough schedule that they've got this year prevents them from being any higher in the rankings because they travel to Ohio State, Penn State, and then they host Michigan State and Minnesota. They've lost some big playmakers as well, like AJ Epinesa, defensive end Tristan Wirfs, tackle, and their main man at quarterback Nate Stanley. But there should be some good competition there this year with 3 players fighting it out. They've been a tight end factory the last couple of years with Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, and Sam Laporta looks to be another quality player coming out of Iowa at tight end. The defense retains most of its players, and the O-line, which was ranked 6th overall in 2019, keeps most of its starters. Another player to look out for would be Tyler Goodson, the running back. He had 804 yards from scrimmage last year with 5 touchdowns as a freshman, and I'd look for him to play a bigger role this year. Baylor are another very unknown team in this year. They come off the back of a good year last year where they went 11-3, but they've got a new coach in, Dave Aranda, who's been a defensive coordinator at LSU and Wisconsin, among other schools. The big problem for Baylor this year, I think, is that there's only going to be 2 out of 11 starters return on the defense, so there's inevitably going to be some mistakes and blown coverages, and therefore the offense needs to step up. And Charlie Brewer at quarterback, he's a great playmaker, but his O-line was very weak in 2019. And also Denzel Mims, his top wide receiver, is gone. But 4 of those starters do return on the O-line, and hopefully with another year, their chemistry improves. and also they have a fairly deep wide receiver core, so I don't think that would be too much of a problem. They've got a new offensive coordinator coming in as well, but as I said, this can't be an excuse. The offense has to step up to hide any defensive weaknesses this year. The tough schedule puts them slightly lower on the list than maybe they would be when they travel to Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Texas and Texas Tech, whilst also welcoming TCU and Oklahoma State to Baylor. Scott Satterfield looks to capitalise on a good first year with Louisville after finishing 8-5, but the schedule this year does look really tough. They're going to go to Clemson, Notre Dame and Boston College, and they've got to host Virginia Tech and Florida State. The Louisville O-line was awful in 2019, even with Mekhi Becton, who's now with the Jets, but somehow their running game was still great, averaging 213 yards per game, and Javian Hawkins rushed for over 1,500 yards. Junior quarterback Michael Cunningham's no Trevor Lawrence, but he did pass for over 2,000 yards and 22 touchdowns in 2019. And combine this with 3 great wide receivers, and Louisville do look to have the second best offense after Clemson in the ACC. But the defense does need to step up in 2020 if they're going to get anywhere, as they were the worst defense in the ACC last year. But 9 out of the 11 starters returned, so hopefully they can build on something this year. Texas are still in uncertain times. Tom Herman, the head coach, goes into his 4th year with them after 10-4 in 2018, followed by 8-5 last year. A tough schedule this year meets Texas as they go on the road to LSU, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech and Oklahoma in Dallas. Meanwhile, Baylor and TCU come to Texas. They have 16 starters returning on offense and defense combined, and therefore the team chemistry will improve, and hopefully they'll build on the good foundations that they have. And quarterback Sam Ehlinger returns for his senior year to bring stability. He showed great production with nearly 3,300 and 3,700 yards in his last 2 seasons, with 25 and 30 touchdowns respectively. However, the Texas running game needs to improve if they strive to be a top-tier team. Keontae Ingram showed improvement with a 1,000-yard season from scrimmage with 10 touchdowns, but Texas can't just rely on Ehlinger and his arm to get them over the line. Texas A&M are also set for a big year, with Jimbo Fisher leading them into his 3rd year in charge. This schedule is one of the easiest that the Aggies have had in a while, with only Alabama, LSU and Auburn being potential problems. If Kellen Mond can continue his production against the unranked schools and tidy up against the bigger ones, then the A&M offense will be a force in 2020. However, his interceptions are a problem, with a 20 touchdown to 9 interception ratio in 2019. The offensive line is not also amazing, but overall Mond has the experience and needs to prove something to be drafted this year. On the defensive side, this remains mostly intact, with only Justin Madubuike entering the draft in 2020, so A&M will look to be more consistent on D, as they gave up lots of points to unranked schools but often were clinical against the bigger ranked ones. They've been sleeping giants for a number of years now, therefore the appointment of Mike Norville from Memphis looks to be a step in the right direction to freshen up the programme. He saw relative success there, considering they aren't a powerhouse of college football as such. And I would say Florida State are the unknown this year with a new head coach and changes of scheme, because Norville will come and look to play a spread offense. They have an average schedule, but towards the hard side, because they play at Miami and Louisville, and they host Boston College, Florida and Clemson. The offensive line will need to step up this year if they're going to do anything. Cam Akers was a very special talent last year at running back, and he almost always made something from nothing, but the defense was constantly in the backfield, and junior quarterback James Blackman will also need to step up in accuracy, because he had 17 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, but he does comfortably air the ball out, and he has an experienced wide receiver core. He threw for 2,300 yards last year. They've got 10 out of 11 starters back on defense. The only negative is that none of them were very good. However, with another year of playing together, another year of experience, maybe they'll be able to sort these problems out and get themselves a good record next year. Michigan. They come off the back of a disappointing 9-4 season under Jim Harbaugh, and this was in large parts due to hugely inconsistent quarterback Shea Patterson, but also a run game that didn't always function well. This year, Michigan's schedule looks slightly more favourable, with Penn State and Wisconsin at home, but hard trips to Michigan State, Ohio State and Minnesota await. Hassan Haskins and Zach Charbonnet had 662 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 750 yards and 11 touchdowns from scrimmage respectively, and therefore going into their sophomore year, I think Michigan will see more production from the two of them with more experience. But Michigan do have to replace every O-line position except from right tackle, but they do normally replace the offensive line well. On the other side of the ball, the Michigan defense was poor by its normal standard. I would look to see it return to its normal state in 2020. After Devin Bush's departure, they've lacked real speed on the defensive side of the ball, but keep an eye out for Josh McGrone, Josh Ross and Anthony Solomon. Tidying up on errors, Michigan could improve their record and push Ohio State harder this year for the Big Ten title. PJ Fleck enters his 4th year with Minnesota, a team who haven't stopped improving under his tutelage. Their 11-2 record last year saw them at 10 in the AP poll, the highest that they've been since the 60s, and included wins against Penn State and Auburn. This year, the schedule is a much tougher one, welcoming Michigan and Iowa to Minnesota, but road games at Wisconsin, Michigan State and Nebraska could be difficult. 9 out of 11 starters return on offense, and last season it was efficient and explosive, able to march down the field quickly. Junior quarterback Tanner Morgan has 2 great seasons of experience under his belt of 1,400 and 3,200 passing yards respectively, whilst throwing 30 touchdowns in 2019. He has the 4th best completion rate in college football in 2019, and I'd look to see him and the Minnesota offense kick on. However, pass protection needs to be better to give Morgan more time in the pocket. Defensive side of the ball could be a problem as they lost 4 players this year, including big playmaker Winfield Jr. at safety. And if they're to have any success, they need to find a good pass rusher in the squad. There aren't so many concerns at linebacker as they have a good bunch of talented players there. This will certainly be an interesting team this season. They finished 8-5 in 2019, which was Jeremy Pruitt's 2nd year, so it was a good improvement and they only seem to be getting better. However, it's a big point. The schedule in 2020 looks really tough for them. They welcome Florida, Missouri, Alabama and Kentucky, whilst road games include South Carolina, Oklahoma, Georgia and Vanderbilt. The O-line and backfield is stacked for Tennessee, and the defense have clearly bought into Pruitt's values, coming in at 23rd best defense in the country, which is big improvements from where they were before. The QB battle should be interesting, but Jarrett Guarantano will probably be the starter, who threw for over 2,000 yards and 16 touchdowns last year, but interceptions were a problem for him as he threw 8 of them. Tennessee rotate their running backs well, with Jordan, Gray and Chandler combining for 450 to 600 yards rushing each, culminating in a great rushing offense as they're always fresh to find the gaps that the quality O-line has found. Amazing season last time in Baton Rouge for LSU, obviously, as they won the national championship. However, such a good season obviously means a lot of people entering the draft, and 14 starters entered it this year, tied for the most ever. Their schedule sees them take trips to Florida, Auburn, Texas A&M, and they host Alabama, South Carolina and Texas. Miles Brennan looks to be a quality replacement for Joe Burrow, and down at LSU they think they've found their man to lead them to another national championship after sitting behind Joe Burrow for the last couple of years. But 4 or 5 of their O-line gone and their first running back, so I'm not expecting a lot of production, but I still think they'll find a way to be fairly successful because of Ed Orgeron in charge, who's an incredible coach, and the freshman and sophomore players are also very good because their recruiting classes have been deep and with high quality. On the defensive side of the ball, they finished 31st last year overall, and I'd expect this to drop off more this year because they'll have a new coordinator and a new scheming coming from changing from 3-4 to a 4-3, so it'll take time for these players to adjust. All in all, I'd say a good season for LSU, but nowhere near the heights of last year, and I think just outside the top 10 is a fair assessment of where they'll finish. This is Dan Muller's 3rd year in charge after 2 seasons with big improvements from 10-3 in 2018 to 11-2 in 2019. Florida's schedule isn't ridiculously hard, but there are potential banana skins with road trips to an improving Tennessee and Florida State and to Ole Miss, whilst welcoming South Carolina, LSU and Georgia. Kyle Trask will be Florida's main man in 2020 after impressing in his junior year, throwing for almost 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns. However, Florida will expect their younger wide receivers to step up after 3 of their wideouts were drafted this year. The defense will also need a bit of a shake-up considering an edge rusher, linebacker and cornerback were drafted. However, they were ranked 9th best D overall in 2019 and therefore there are solid foundations to build on. It could be a very impressive year for the Gators. The Badgers seem to be a quality outfit every year under Paul Christ, and this year I predict no different. The schedule this year is extremely favourable for them, and the only notable games are at Michigan and hosting Notre Dame and Minnesota. However, if Wisconsin are to have any success in 2020, they need to replace Jonathan Taylor, but to ask a running back to replicate his 2,000-yard season would be unfair, but they do need really good production to get the offense going. The offensive line also needs filling following some departures if this is to happen. Senior Jack Cohn, quarterback, improves year on year, throwing for 2,700 yards and 18 touchdowns in 2019, but his two main wide receivers were drafted, and they need to get a good third wideout to add to their deep wide receiver core. On the defense side of the ball, all of their D-line return, who had the second most sacks in college football 2019 and the fourth best defense overall, so that makes for exciting reading. All in all, 10 out of 11 starters return in this dominant defense, and with not a very tough schedule, I would expect big things from them this year. Since 2017, Brian Kelly has got this powerhouse of college football back on track after a wobbly 2016, and they've looked great ever since. I'd say this year looks no different, with a fairly easy schedule presented to them, with the only notables being Clemson, as in Wisconsin, and Louisville. On the offensive side of the ball, they have 7 starters returning, and 5 of these are all of the O-line spots, and as usual, Notre Dame is a production line, and all of them could go and play in the NFL after college. They'll need a productive running back to fill the void of Tony Jones, but Flemister and Smith showed potential last term. Quarterback Ian Book looks to be a real stud as he enters his senior year, as he threw for 3,000 yards and 34 touchdowns in 2019, also rushing for 500. This man could truly do it all, however he has to be more consistent against the bigger schools and not just racking up stats against the inferior ones. The Notre Dame defense is where the questions lie this season, losing 4 defensive captains for 2020, and this will be tough, but they do have great replacements to fill those gaps. The young edge rushers on the roster look particularly good, but I question if they can really replace safety Alohi Gilman. Overall, I think another positive year for Notre Dame, and I would be surprised to see more than 1 or 2 losses. Gus Malzahn's been with Auburn for 8 years now, and he's been a winning head coach throughout his years there. Last year was challenging though, one due to the hard schedule, and secondly due to the fact they had a freshman quarterback in Bo Nix. The 2020 schedule is much kinder to them, but the notable games are at Alabama, Georgia and Mississippi State, whilst they host Texas A&M and LSU. However, Bo Nix did look to be a real talent last year, throwing for 2,500 yards and 16 touchdowns. The thing to propel him to the next level is his accuracy and increase in his completion rate, given the wide receivers are not an excuse with a loaded wide receiver core. Look to see a real production increase from Nix in year 2. But the problem will be 4 starters on the O-line are gone, so they will need replacing them fast if Nix is going to utilise these great wide receivers. The running game was also average last year with 700 yards for White, who managed 10 touchdowns, but they need to gain more from the run game. The defense has a lot of replacing to do, with the 3 D-line starters gone, but they're replaced well by the younger products of Auburn. The biggest concerns lie in the secondary. Losing 4 starters is a major problem with no grade A replacements. I think this is what could hold Auburn back, despite the fact I think their offense will dominate sides. All in all, I think a good year for them. Since 2016, James Franklin has driven this Penn State team to be one of the best Big Ten teams, and the 11-2 finish in 2019 proved exactly this. The 2020 schedule looks tough as usual in a hard conference, but maybe slightly easier than last year as they welcome Ohio State, Michigan State and Iowa to Pennsylvania, whilst only travelling to Michigan as a big school. Sean Clifford looked really comfortable in his sophomore year at quarterback, and I would expect him to take a loaded offense to the next level in 2020. He amassed 2,600 yards and 23 touchdowns, and with a great running back in Journey Brown beside him, who gained 1,000 all-purpose yards and 13 touchdowns, I think the Penn State offense is in good hands. Their 2 backup running backs also look good, who gained over 800 yards and 11 touchdowns between them. If the Penn State team has any ambition to dethrone Ohio State in the Big Ten, they need to have a stout defense similar to Ohio State in 2019, as Penn State will rank the 34th best defense in the country. But the news that defensive end Shaka Toney and safety Lamont Wade are staying will certainly be a boost to the defense. Micah Parsons certainly looks a stud at linebacker to watch out for in 2020, and I think Penn State are going to have a really great year. A very good season saw Oregon finish 12-2 in 2019, who have improved in the last couple of seasons under Mario Cristobal, and the schedule is typically very easy for Oregon as they're a lot better than the other sides in the Pac-12, but a home game early on against Ohio State in 2020 looks like a loss. Tyler Shuck looks to be the certain replacement for Justin Herbert. He was an amazing recruit out of high school, and this is his year to really prove himself. The Oregon run game's been tremendous, with CJ Vidal rushing for over 1,000 yards in freshman and sophomore years with 18 rushing touchdowns. To maintain the success in Pac-12, Vidal needs to stay healthy and keep producing these numbers. The O-line also performed well, helping him out, ranked 14th in the nation in 2019, but they've all left and there are 4 spots to be filled now. Their defence was also good in 2019, ranked 22nd overall, and retaining 8 starters will lead to another good year. Whilst losing Troy Dye at linebacker was a negative, they recruited a 5-star Noah Sewell. The secondary is also extremely experienced and talented. However, to have a chance at a playoff berth this season, Oregon will need to step up on both sides of the ball against inferior teams and be more consistent to prevent losses like last season against Arizona State, and make sure that games aren't too close when unnecessary, like against Washington and Washington State last year. Georgia had a good season last year, finishing 12-2 under Kirby Smart, who's really improved the standard of Georgia football since taking over in 2016. I think it's an average schedule for them this season, as they missed some big names, but they also gained some hard ones. They travel to Alabama, South Carolina, Florida and Jacksonville, and they're at home to Auburn and Tennessee. The quarterback battle will be interesting after Jake Fromm's departure. Transfer Jamie Newman is the presumed starter, but I think it'll be a tough year for whoever's under centre, given the new O-line and wide receiver core is unproven after numerous players have moved on. 2 running backs, Herrion and White, combined last year for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns between them, so the loss of DeAndre Swift will not be felt too much. The new offensive coordinator is pass happy, so expect more of a spread offense coming into 2020 and less willingness to keep pounding the rock. On the defensive side of the ball, they ranked 3rd overall in 2019 and they have the majority of starters returning, especially in the secondary and linebacker spots, which bodes well for the season. They have a couple of good young defensive linemen on the roster too, such as Rochester and Herring, and therefore I would expect Georgia to be pushing very hard for a college playoff spot. They finished 11-2 last year in Nick Saban, and in a loaded SEC conference, all you can ask for is the hardest games, you get them at home, and Alabama have this luxury this year. Their notable games are on the road to Tennessee and LSU, and at home to Georgia, Texas A&M and Auburn. Another quarterback battle emerges here at Alabama. Mac Jones looks to be the early favourite for the job after learning the ropes from Tua last season and also having a few meaningful reps. But Alabama did just recruit 5-star freshman Bryce Young, so we'll have to wait and see how that one plays out. Alabama lost a couple of great receivers, but also have good younger ones in Waddle and Smith, so I wouldn't say there's any cause for concern there. And Najee Harris also returns, who contributed 1,500 all-purpose yards and 20 touchdowns in 2019, so I'd expect more dominance from him this year. The defensive side of the ball should also be more solid this year, with Moses returning and the front 7 hopefully not getting injured as much as last year, as they crippled them up front. But Alabama do lose the most depth at secondary. However, the recruiting class was deep there. They also managed to hold on to an offensive coordinator for the first time since 2016, so expect more chemistry and better play calls going forward. I would say another great year for Saban's men is on the cards. They finished last season at 12-2 like 2018 and 2017 under Lincoln Riley, and this year provides an easy schedule which should comfortably see the Sooners into a playoff spot. The notable games are on the road at TCU and home games to Tennessee, Texas, Baylor and Oklahoma State. Spencer Rattler seems to be the QB1, but Tanner Mordecai, who backed up Jalen Hurts last year, will be following closely behind. This will be a case of whether Oklahoma can get Rattler college football ready, as it's a big step up from high school. Obviously, Oklahoma had a stacked wide receiver core last year, and it's no different this year, as Rambo and Hazelwood return along with younger wide receivers who look to impress. They also have Kennedy Brooks, who's their running back for 2020, who rushed for more than 1,000 yards in his freshman and sophomore years. The defense also improved in 2019 for Oklahoma, but going into 2020 they lose nose guard Neville Gallimore and linebacker Kenneth Murray and a couple of other starters due to graduation, so expect to see a lot of new faces. If they can step up early on, then I fully expect this Sooners team to challenge for the national championship. They went 13-2 in 2019, and since 2012, they've been a real force of college football, and they'll continue to be for many years by the looks of things. The schedule looks fairly average for Ohio State, and I think they'll see off all of the teams. The notable fixtures are at Penn State, Michigan State, and Oregon, whilst they host Michigan. Justin Fields is certainly a Heisman candidate at quarterback, and apart from KJ Hill and Victor at wide receiver, the offense is pretty much untouched. Master Teague rushed for 700 yards as a backup, and they've just got Trey Sermon, an Oklahoma transfer, so expect the run game to be strong again, and the offensive line is intact, so expect a high-powered offense again. On defense, Ohio State lose big playmakers at every position, and even for a great program like them, this will be a problem. They had the best defence overall in college football 2019. It won't be as productive this year, but they do have the weapons to put in and still have relative success. Smith and Harrison combined will have the role of Chase Young from last season, and the secondary and linebackers will be more than okay with the recruiting class and sophomores coming through. I'd expect a lot of higher scoring games this season though, considering the defence will not be as strong as last year. I still fully expect Ohio State to challenge Clemson for the national championship. The Dabo Swinney era has been very successful for Clemson, going 14-1 in 2019 with the only loss coming to LSU, and I can see them going one step further this year. The schedule's very easy for them, but their notable fixtures are on the road to Boston College, Florida State and Notre Dame, and at home to Louisville and South Carolina. Trevor Lawrence is clearly the Heisman Trophy favourite going into 2020, and with good reason. He passed for 3,600 yards and 36 touchdowns in 2019, also rushing for 500 yards and 9 touchdowns. Travis Etienne also returns to the offense, who amassed 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 23 touchdowns. They lose 4 starters on the O-line, but their replacements are all very good players, and they only lost T. Higgins at wide receiver, so Trevor Lawrence still has his targets, and I would expect big things from the offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Clemson were ranked 6th overall in 2019, but they lose cornerback 1 Terrell, along with both safeties, Wallace and Muse. So there'll be some reshuffling there. Xavier Thomas, defensive end, also needs to be productive if Clemson are going to pressure the quarterback. But apart from that, the core of the front 7 is intact, and I expect another season of stout defense from Clemson. Combine this with extremely high-powered offense, it's hard to predict that any other team apart from Clemson will win the national championship this year. And if you've reached this stage of the video, I'd just like to thank you once again for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. I'll see you in the next one.